I overheard my own son digging a hole for my grave. That's not a metaphor. I mean it literally. It was a few minutes past midnight. I'd gone outside to check the garden faucet. It had been leaking. And that's when I saw them. Two silhouettes under the pale shimmer of the backyard light. One was my son, Greg, the other his wife, Cassandra. They were whispering, but their movements were frantic. One held a flashlight, the other a shovel. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was too old, too weak, too far gone to notice anything anymore. They didn't see me behind the curtain. Didn't hear the old wood creak under my feet as I stepped back from the window, pulse thudding like a war drum in my ears. I wanted to believe it was something innocent, a broken pipe, a gardening project, anything. But when I saw the large garbage bag lying at the base of the hole, just wide enough, just deep enough, I knew. And it was in that moment, with my mouth dry and my soul screaming silently, that something inside me died. But something else was born. I didn't cry, I didn't collapse, I didn't confront. I walked back to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and whispered to myself, "Not yet. Let them think the old man's already dead. Let them dig." Because I had a plan of my own, and I wasn't going to be the one buried. My name is Walter. I'm 77 years old, and I live in a small town outside of Cincinnati. I've been a widower for 12 years. I have 3 children, but only one still talks to me. Well, used to. Greg. He moved into my house 6 years ago to help out. That's what he said. Slowly, the help turned into control, then silence, then resentment, and now this. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to thank the Father's Advice channel for letting men like me speak the truths most people are too afraid to hear. If you're listening to this, I'd appreciate if you'd drop a comment below. Just let me know where in the world you're listening from. It helps remind me there are still people out there who care about dignity, about truth. People who still believe a man's worth doesn't expire with age. Anyway, back to that night. I didn't sleep. I sat in my old rocking chair, listening to the wind whisper through the cracked windows, thinking about every mistake I might have made to raise a son who could look at me and think, "He's nothing now." I thought of my late wife, Marjorie, how proud she'd been when Greg got his first job at the bank, how she'd hold my hand and say, "He's a good boy, Walt. You did good." I thought about her grave, how I'd picked the plot myself, a soft spot under a cherry tree, peaceful. I thought I'd be buried beside her, but not like this, not by their hands, not in a backyard like a dead raccoon. So I waited, and the next morning, before they woke up, I did something else with that grave, something that would change everything. But I'll get to that soon. What matters now is this. They thought they were burying me. They had no idea what I buried instead. 2 days before I saw the shovel, my son told me he wanted to reconnect. He came home from work, loosened his tie, and said, "Hey, Dad, what do you think about a weekend, just the two of us? No phones, no distractions, just like we used to when I was a kid." I was so caught off guard I didn't know what to say. My hands trembled as I set down the tea kettle. He hadn't asked me about my health in months. He hadn't sat down for dinner with me since the last time his wife went to visit her sister. But there he was, smiling, calling me Dad like it still meant something. He even laughed a little, touched my shoulder. "You remember that old cabin in Shawnee? I booked something just like it. Fireplace, woods, silence. And God help me, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this boy I raised, whose scraped knees I used to bandage, had come back to me. That maybe the bitterness had passed. That he'd finally seen me as more than a weight chained to his ankles. I packed my overnight bag the next morning, just the essentials. Warm socks, my reading glasses, a photo of Marjorie I keep in my wallet. Cassandra didn't say a word as we left, just watched us from the doorway, arms folded, her face carved from stone. The drive was quiet, not unkind. Greg played the radio low, country music. The old kind, Merle, Willie, real stuff. It almost made me smile. I thought, maybe this is healing. Maybe he remembered I liked the ones with stories, not noise. But he didn't ask about me, not really. No questions about the pain in my knees, the garden, the church group I'd stopped going to. Just surface-level talk. Traffic's better this way. I read they're building a Walmart out here. We'll grill steaks when we get there. And when he spoke, it was all so polite. Empty, like a man reading from a cue card. Still, I ignored the voice in my chest that said, "This isn't love. This is theater." Because the truth is, loneliness will make a man believe things he shouldn't. It will make a man pack a bag and follow his son to a cabin in the woods because a single "Dad, I miss you" feels like a rescue rope. But it wasn't a rope. It was bait, and by the time I figured that out, we were already halfway there, with no phone signal, no neighbors, and no one who knew where I was. The cabin was just as he described, warm wood walls, a stone fireplace, the faint scent of pine and smoke. On the surface, it was perfect. Too perfect. Like a postcard sent from a place that didn't really exist anymore. Greg brought in the bags, started a fire, even opened a bottle of wine. "You want a glass, Dad?" he asked Pete, already pouring it before I could answer. I sat in the armchair, the kind that creaked when you shifted, and watched the flames lick at the logs. For a moment, I let myself believe this was real, that my son just wanted time with me. No paperwork, no expectations, just time. We ate grilled cheese that night. He made it like he used to when Marjorie worked late. Extra butter, burnt edges, way too much cheese. I almost laughed. I told him it tasted just like the ones he made when he was 12. He smiled, a soft, tired smile. "You remember that?" I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Of course I do. You used to bring it to me on a paper plate like it was a feast." He looked away after that, back into the fire. "I was a stupid kid," he muttered. I wanted to say, "No, you were kind, you were my boy." But I didn't. The moment passed, and something colder settled into the room. That night, as I stood to go to bed, Greg stopped me. "Hey, just give me your phone real quick. Signal's bad up here. Don't want you stressing about calls or texts. Just relax, all right?" It was said kindly, but the way he took it, slipping it into his pocket without waiting, it didn't feel kind. It felt like taking. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that made your ears ring. No birds, no bugs, just wind outside and creaking beams inside. In the middle of the night, I got up to use the bathroom. On my way back, I noticed something. The front door had a bolt lock. It was latched from the inside, and Greg had the key. That bolt stayed on all weekend. He said it was for safety. "Wild animals," he joked. "Don't want bears sneaking in." But I've lived through too many winters to buy that. There were no bears. Just a father in a locked house and a son watching him. By the time we drove back, I didn't know what scared me more, the trip itself or the way I almost believed it meant something. Sometimes a soft voice and a warm room are all it takes to lead a man to the edge of something terrible. It's strange how coming home no longer felt like coming home. The house was just as I left it, my slippers by the back door, the folded blanket on the couch where I nap in the afternoons, the dusty sunlight spilling across the wooden floorboards, but I felt like a guest, like I'd crossed some invisible line during that weekend, and now nothing fit the same way it used to. Greg was different too. He was quieter, polite, but with that same hollow undertone I couldn't ignore anymore. He stopped calling me Dad, just Walter. Like we were acquaintances, strangers bound by a title neither of us respected. 3 days passed. I didn't say much. I spent most of my time in the garden or sitting on the porch pretending to read. My thoughts were loud, and my gut louder. Something had shifted, I just didn't know what yet. Then came the phone call. It was Maria, my daughter's old friend from high school. We hadn't spoken in years. Her voice was sharp, panicked. "Walter, I don't know how to say this, but I think your son is doing something legal. dangerous. I came across a filing while doing remote work for an elder law attorney. It had your name on it." I sat down. My knees buckled. "What kind of filing?" I asked, though I already felt the noose tightening. "Guardianship. Out of state. Filed 2 weeks ago. There's also a POA, power of attorney, that's been updated. Your name, your signature. But, Walter, it didn't look right. It looked copied, digitally pasted." I didn't speak. I couldn't. "And there's more. A contract with a private care facility, prepaid deposit, move-in date in 3 weeks." I remember the hum in my ears, like static. Like I was tuning out of the world, one heartbeat at a time. "He's trying to have me committed," I whispered. Maria didn't answer. She didn't have to. I hung up the phone and sat there for a long time, just breathing, just staring at the wall. He wasn't just done with me. He wanted control, full control. He wanted the house, the pension, the decisions. And he didn't even have the spine to talk to me face to face, just papers, just forged signatures and hidden plans. And suddenly that weekend made sense. The cabin, the locked door, the forced smiles. It was never a gift. It was a goodbye. He was trying to vanish me, legally, quietly, neatly. But he forgot something. I may be old, but I am not gone. Not yet. We were driving along the county road when Greg suddenly said, "Mind if we stop real quick? I need to pick up some supplies." I didn't answer, just nodded. My mind was still spinning from Maria's phone call. I hadn't told him I knew, not yet. I was still holding my cards, waiting. He pulled into a gravel lot behind a small feed store. One of those places with rusted signs, hand-painted hours, and a tired dog sleeping near the propane tanks. Greg turned off the engine and smiled too wide. "You can wait in the car, Dad. I'll be 5 minutes." That's when I knew. That smile, that tone. It was the same one he used when he used to sneak beer from the garage fridge in high school and thought I wouldn't notice. But I always noticed. "No," I said quietly. "I need to stretch my legs." His smile cracked, just slightly. "All right. Suit yourself." We walked inside, dusty air, shelves lined with seed bags, and a grizzled man behind the counter with a name tag that read Ray. Greg wandered off toward the gardening tools. I watched him from the corner of my eye. Then I saw it. An old rotary phone behind the counter. Probably hadn't rung in years. I stepped up to the register. "Excuse me, sir," I said softly. Mind if I make a local call? Just need to reach a friend. Emergency." The man squinted, studied me. Maybe he saw something in my face. Desperation, maybe, or fear. He handed me the receiver. "Make it quick, old-timer." I dialed the number by memory. Daniel Pickens. Retired sheriff's deputy. A man I once pulled out of a ditch during a winter storm 20 years ago. We hadn't spoken in over a year. He picked up on the third ring. "Dan here?" "It's Walter," I said. My voice cracked on the second syllable. He paused. "Walt, you all right?" I turned my back to Greg. "No. But I'm about to be in a lot worse if I don't get some help. I need you to listen carefully." I told him everything in under 2 minutes. The guardianship, the facility, the forged papers, the backyard. He didn't interrupt once. At the end, he just said, "Okay, don't panic. You stay calm. Let me make a few calls. We'll set things in motion." When I hung up, I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace, but purpose. Greg came up behind me with a bag of fertilizer in one hand, his eyes scanning my face. "Everything all right?" I smiled. "Yeah, just needed to use the bathroom." He didn't press. He never knew that feed store, just a blip on his plan, would become the place where mine began. He thought he was playing chess with a pawn, but he forgot one thing. Pawns can become kings, too. The next morning, I put on my Sunday clothes. Not because I was going to church, but because I needed to look like a man who still mattered. I shaved, combed what little hair I had left, and slid on the dark brown blazer Marjorie once said made me look respectable. As I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I hadn't seen in years, a man with purpose, not just survival, a man ready to reclaim his name before it was signed away behind his back. I left before Greg woke up. The bank was quiet that early, just the way I needed. Donna was at the counter. She'd known me for over a decade. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Mr. Hale, you're early today." I leaned in slightly, my voice low. "Donna, I need to speak with the manager, privately." Something in my tone erased the smile from her face. She nodded, disappeared behind the frosted glass. Mr. Kennedy came out, a serious man in suspenders and wire-framed glasses, old school as they come. He'd been handling my account since Marjorie passed. He respected me. I could feel it in the way he offered his hand. "Walter, come on back." We sat in his office with the blinds drawn, and I told him everything, not all the drama, just the facts. Someone's attempting to access my accounts, possibly using outdated authorizations. I want everything locked. I want all transfers flagged. I want every single point of vulnerability sealed, and I want it done now. He didn't question it, just nodded. Understood. He walked me through it, every form, every new password, every extra layer. We closed the joint accounts Greg had access to. We reset the online credentials. We issued a new debit card and shredded the old one right there in front of me. The final step was voice authentication. "Just say a phrase you'll remember," he said. I looked out the window at the old elm tree swaying in the wind. "I am still here," I said. He typed it in. Before I left, Mr. Kennedy put his hand gently on my shoulder. "I don't know what's going on, Walter, but you're not alone." I nodded, throat thick. "That's the hardest part, feeling like you are." I walked out of that bank with nothing visible in my hands, but everything had changed. Greg didn't know it yet, but the man he thought was helpless had just built a wall he couldn't climb. The next step? Taking back my name, not just from the banks, but from the lies. It was strange how something as simple as a signature could feel like a scalpel. I sat in that little notary's office, hands folded on my lap, staring down at a fresh stack of paper. The smell of ink, the buzz of fluorescent lights overhead, the quiet ticking of the wall clock, it all pressed down like a sermon. The notary was a woman named Lee, young, polite, kind in that way people are when they sense you're not just there for paperwork. "These are the revocation documents," she said, sliding the first sheet toward me. "Once you sign, the previous power of attorney is null and void." I didn't hesitate. Greg's name was printed in bold at the top of the revoked document. It looked so official, so clean. Like it belonged there, like he was still the son I used to carry on my shoulders through the 4th of July parades downtown. But he wasn't. Not anymore. I signed. One stroke. Then another. Lee stamped it without a word. Next came the medical directives. I listed Daniel, my old friend, the retired deputy, as the emergency contact and medical proxy, a man I trusted with my safety more than my own flesh and blood. "Would you like to draft a new will today?" Lee asked softly. I looked up. "Yes," I said, but I brought it with me. I reached into my coat pocket and unfolded 3 handwritten pages. I'd stayed up the night before writing every word by hand. No lawyer, no prefab templates, just my words. It detailed everything: the house, the small savings, my late wife's antique jewelry, the patch of land we'd never built on. All of it rerouted. All of it protected. None of it going to Greg. Instead, I left it to my grandchildren, still too young to understand the storm above their heads. And to the church, where I'd once rebuilt the front steps with my bare hands. And to Maria for sounding the alarm, and Daniel for standing guard, and one small sum to Cassandra, with a note attached. "For the curtains you'll never draw again in my house." Lee notarized every page. "Anything else?" she asked. I looked at her. "Yes," I said, placing a final envelope on the table. "This one's for my grandson, when he turns 18, No sooner. What's in it? Everything his father tried to erase. When I stepped out of that office, the autumn air felt different, colder, but cleaner, like something heavy had been washed away. Greg still thought he had the upper hand, but he hadn't seen the pen I was holding, and he hadn't heard what I planned to bury next. The thing about houses is, they remember. Every nail, every paint stroke, every loose floorboard that groans at night, it's all a memory, a record, and mine was no different. I had built half of it myself back when Greg was just a boy, running around in overalls and jelly-stained cheeks. He used to call it our fort, but somewhere along the way he stopped saying our and started calling it his. I never corrected him, not out loud. That was my mistake. The day after the notary, I walked into the garage and opened the bottom drawer of my old filing cabinet. The metal squealed like it hadn't been touched in years, but inside everything was right where I'd left it. The original deed, the mortgage release, the property tax statements, all in my name, just my name, not Greg's. I sat at the workbench, paper spread out, and felt something shift. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. I called Daniel. I need one more favor. He met me that afternoon, freshly shaved, clipboard in hand, still carried himself like a deputy, even in retirement. He read every document twice, then looked at me with that steady gaze of his. "It's yours, Walt. On paper, in law and fact. You want to make a move?" I nodded. Just a letter, no fireworks. We typed it up together, short, precise, professional. Dear Gregory, this notice is to formally remind you that the property at 318 Fieldstone Road remains legally owned by Walter Hale. No transfer of title has occurred. All decisions regarding residency, remodeling, subleasing, or sale must be approved by the legal owner. This letter serves as documented notification. Sincerely, Walter Hale. No threats, no accusations, just the truth, written cleanly in black and white. Daniel hand-delivered it while I waited in the living room. Greg didn't say anything when he opened the envelope, just stared at the page like it was written in another language. Later that night, he slammed the pantry door hard enough to rattle the dishes. That was his response. Anger without a target, control slipping through fingers that never earned it in the first place. He didn't know what to do when the man he thought was weak stood up, without yelling, without begging, and took back the ground beneath his own feet. I didn't sleep much that night. But when I did, it was the first time in years I dreamed in color. Because for the first time in a long time, the house knew whose name to whisper, and it wasn't his. I used to think betrayal came like a knife, fast, sharp, and sudden. But the older I get, the more I see it for what it really is, a slow leak. A drip of cold water in the same spot on your soul, until one day it cracks something permanent. Greg never screamed at me. He never struck me or cursed my name. No, he did something worse. He made me feel invisible. It started small. "Don't get up, Dad. I've got it." But then he stopped actually getting it. Maybe let me handle the bills from now on. It's easier for me. But the mail stopped coming to my name. "Why don't you sit this one out? You're tired." But I never said I was. Then it turned into silence. Weeks without a real conversation. Meals where he scrolled through his phone while I ate alone across the table, the day he moved his home office into Marjorie's old sewing room without asking. The afternoon, I heard him tell a friend over the phone, yeah, he's still hanging around, like I was a stray dog on his porch. But I'm not alone, not really. I've heard the stories whispered in church pews and pharmacy lines. Men like me, fathers who handed over their keys and their trust, and found themselves erased inside their own homes. There was Harold, who got pushed into assisted living after a fall, even though he could still walk. There was Richard, whose daughter-in-law ripped his wedding photos off the wall and put up inspirational quotes instead. And every one of those men had the same look in their eyes, The one I see in mine now when I pass the hallway mirror. Quiet disbelief. How did it come to this? Greg used to call me Superman when I carried him on my shoulders. I still remember the way his small hands clutched my ears like handlebars. Faster. Dad, you're flying. Now he just walks past me like I'm a squeaky floorboard he's learned to ignore. It's not just greed that does this, it's pride. It's the kind of pride that makes a man think he built himself, that the hands that fed him no longer matter. But I remember every hour I worked to buy this home. I remember Marjorie skipping meals to pay for Greg's braces. I remember holding his fevered body at midnight, whispering prayers into his hair. And he remembers too. He just chooses to forget. But I haven't forgotten, and I never will. Because the next time he looks into my eyes, he's going to see the man he tried to bury. And the ground's not going to be soft. The first thing I noticed was the smell of fresh earth. You don't forget that scent if you've ever worked the land. It's different than regular dirt. It's wet, open, new, like a wound that hasn't scabbed yet. I stood at the edge of the backyard just after sunrise. The light was soft, golden, innocent. But the ground told a different story. There it was, right near the old fence line, the same spot I'd seen from the bedroom window that night, still marked by a square patch of disturbed soil, smoothed over just enough to suggest it had been handled, not enough to suggest innocence. I walked up slowly, no rush, no dramatics, just the slow shuffle of a man pretending he didn't already know what he was looking at. Greg came out onto the porch with a mug in hand. "Morning, Dad." I turned my head slightly, nodded. "You were busy out here," he sipped. "Yeah, thought we could put in a koi pond, something peaceful." "A pond?" He nodded too quickly. "Cassandra's idea. Help the stress. You know how she gets." I stared at him for a moment, just long enough to make the silence stretch. Then I looked back down at the dirt. That hole was no pond. I know the dimensions of a grave. I've buried pets, friends, and a wife. I've stood over rectangles of sorrow too many times not to recognize one when I see it. It was narrow, deep, quiet, wrong. Still, I didn't say anything. I just squatted slowly, let my fingers sink into the loose soil. "Planning to call someone to dig it proper?" I asked, my voice even. Greg chuckled, but it sounded like someone blowing air into a cracked balloon. "Yeah, just wanted to get it started myself." I stood. "Well," I said, brushing my hands clean, "you dug something all right?" He didn't answer. Just drank his coffee like it might scald the guilt off his tongue. I went back inside and wrote everything down, date, time, exact location, even took a picture from the hallway window later that evening. It's strange how betrayal makes you precise. I became a man of record, not rage. Because that hole wasn't going to take me. No, it was going to hold something else. And in just a few days, I was going to fill it myself, not with a body, but with the kind of truth that doesn't rot. I used to believe that if you raised a child with love, they'd remember it. Turns out, some of them remember it just long enough to weaponize it. After I saw the hole in Greg's empty smile, I knew I couldn't just rely on paperwork anymore. I needed something heavier. Something that couldn't be denied or twisted later. Not emotion, not stories. Evidence. So I called Daniel again. He showed up the next morning with a duffel bag and a look on his face I hadn't seen since we were both in our 50s, back when we installed a ramp for his late wife together without saying a word. Just two old men with hammers and a clock ticking down. "You sure about this?" he asked. "I'm past sure." We worked quietly. A trail cam in the corner window of the second floor angled perfectly toward the backyard. A second one inside the garage, tucked behind the old model airplane box Greg hadn't touched since high school. Both were motion-activated, night vision-enabled, and password-locked. Then came the recorder, a small device, size of a car key, nestled in the hem of my coat, stitched into the lining. It activated with a touch. I practiced turning it on and off 3 times before Daniel nodded. Good, he said. Subtle, legal, safe. I also shared my live location with Maria and Daniel through my phone. Every movement tracked. If I went dark for more than a few hours, they'd know where to look. I wasn't playing games anymore. I started journaling too, writing down every interaction with Greg, times, words, gestures, tone. If he so much as raised his voice or left the house in the middle of the night, I marked it. Not because I was scared, because I was prepared. The oddest part was how calm I felt, like building a fire on a cold day. You don't rush it, you feed it slow, let it breathe, let it burn the right way. Greg still walked around the house like a man untouchable. Still dropped his coffee mug in the sink without rinsing it. Still left bills unopened on the kitchen counter. Still gave me that same polite nothing smile every morning. He thought I was fading, but I was sharpening. Every camera I installed, every step I tracked, every conversation I recorded was a nail in the coffin he'd dug for me. And the day would come when he'd finally trip over his own plan, and when he did, I'd be right there, camera rolling, pen ready, watching from the place he forgot I still owned, the center of the story. I waited until just before sunrise. The house was silent. Greg and Cassandra were still asleep, or pretending to be. Either way, the moment was mine. I stepped out back, shovel in hand, not to dig, but to deliver. The soil was still soft, damp from last night's rain. I knelt beside the hole Greg had started, the one he never finished, and placed the steel box carefully inside. It was heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. Inside that box was everything. A notarized copy of my revoked power of attorney, my new will. A full printed record of the guardianship filing Maria found, the formal bank freeze notice, a signed affidavit from me, describing what I saw, what I knew, and what I feared. And finally, a letter to my grandson, a boy too young to understand betrayal, but one day he will. I sealed the box shut, double-wrapped it in waterproof lining, and lowered it gently into the dirt. Then, from the side of the porch, I picked up the sapling. It was an oak, barely 4 feet tall, young but already stubborn, already reaching for light. I placed it directly above the box and packed the soil around it with care, each scoop a quiet vow. If Greg ever comes out here again, expecting to find a place to hide his shame, he'll find a tree instead. A tree with roots, with memory, with paper underneath that speaks louder than a grave ever could. When I finished, I stood in the morning fog, leaning slightly on the handle of the shovel, and watched as the sky turned a faint rose gold. It looked peaceful, but peace built on lies is just silence in disguise. Greg would never notice the tree at first. He wasn't the type. But one day, when the leaves turned bright in autumn, when the roots cracked the earth in ways he couldn't control, he'd look closer. And he'd wonder. And if he ever tried to dig again, he wouldn't find me. He'd find the truth, and it wouldn't flinch. I cleaned my hands, walked back into the house, and poured myself a cup of coffee. It was stronger than usual, bitter. But so was I. Because while Greg was digging graves, I was planting something else entirely, and it had already started to grow. It happened 3 days later. Just before noon, Greg came into the living room with that same performative brightness I'd come to despise. He suggested we do some yard work together, said the tree needed some mulch. I said, sure. I followed him outside slowly, pretending like my knees ached worse than they did. He walked ahead, shovel in one hand, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. I noticed he was wearing gloves, not gardening gloves, black ones, thin, surgical. That was the moment I knew it was today. The wind was dry, the leaves barely moved, no noise from the street. The world held its breath. He motioned toward the sapling. Why don't you get a closer look? I think it's already grown. His voice was syrupy, friendly, like someone offering candy with broken glass inside. I walked closer, stopped just short of the lip. The hole was shallow now, mostly filled, but still loose enough that a single shove could have sent me stumbling into it. Still close enough that, with the right story, it could have been called an accident. Greg stepped behind me, close, too close. That's when the porch door creaked open. "Gregory Hale," a voice said, calm, firm, measured. Daniel stepped onto the deck, badge in one hand, phone in the other, his camera already rolling. Greg froze. His hand hovered midair, inches from my back. "Step away from your father." Greg turned, his face caught between rage and disbelief. "What the hell is this?" Daniel didn't answer. He just walked down the steps slow and steady, the way men do when they know they're already in control. "The whole thing's on tape," he said, nodding toward the second floor where the lens blinked red. "Every conversation, every movement, every form. You want to call it an accident? You're free to try." Greg stepped back, jaw clenched, hands shaking, but he said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. I stood there, still facing the tree, not moving, my hands at my sides. My breath steady. He thought he'd end my story in the dirt. But he forgot one thing. You can't bury a man who already planted the truth. And the truth, it grows, even in silence. I always thought justice came with noise, gavels, sirens, raised voices in courtrooms. But when it finally arrived at my door, it was quiet. Just papers in an envelope, just signatures, just silence. Greg didn't come home that night after Daniel stepped in. I found his keys on the kitchen counter the next morning. Cassandra was gone by evening. No note, no goodbyes. Just the dull echo of drawers being emptied and closet doors swinging on old hinges. I didn't chase them. A week later, Daniel and Maria sat with me in the dining room as we went through everything. Every form Greg had filed. Voided. The guardianship petition? Tossed. The memory care facility contract? Declared fraudulent due to forged signatures. The lawyer Maria connected me with was kind but firm. "There's enough here to report this as attempted elder abuse and financial exploitation," she said. "It's up to you if we press charges." I looked down at my hands. They were still strong. Scarred, but strong. The same hands that taught Greg how to tie a fishing knot, patch drywall, hold a crying child. But now, they weren't holding anything. "No," I said after a long pause. "No jail, just distance." The lawyer nodded, understood. Greg was served formally the next day. A cease and desist, an alert on his financial activity involving my name, and a quiet warning. Try again, and we press charges. I never saw his face. The envelope was delivered by courier. That's the thing with men like Greg. They expect fury. They expect drama. When you hand them calm, clear consequences instead, it shakes them in ways no screaming ever could. He didn't fight back. He just disappeared into the same silence he once used to erase me, and I let him. Because I didn't need to see him punished. I just needed to know I was no longer his victim. I walked through the house that night alone, room by room. Touched the doorframe where Greg used to measure his height as a boy. Opened Marjorie's old sewing drawer. Smelled the faint trace of lavender in her scarf. Then I stood in the hallway, hands in my pockets, and whispered to no one, "He's gone." But it wasn't sadness in my voice. It was freedom. Because what he meant for my end had become my beginning. And I wasn't finished yet. I started sleeping with the window open again. The wind felt different now, not sharp, not cold, just honest. It rolled in through the cracked pane like an old friend brushing against my cheek in the dark. I used to fear the night, the footsteps in the hallway, the soft creak of Greg's door opening at odd hours. But now, all I heard was the rustle of the oak leaves outside. The tree had taken to the soil like it was always meant to be there. A week after I planted it, a boy from down the street wandered into the yard, baseball glove in hand. He stood next to the sapling, curious. "Did you plant this, mister?" I nodded. Sure did. What's it for? I thought for a moment, looked down at the roots. At the dirt Greg once tried to claim as a grave. It's for everyone, I said. But it grows because someone finally told the truth. He didn't understand, not really, just shrugged and ran off. But I did. Every morning now I drink my coffee on the porch, watch the tree, talk to Daniel sometimes. Maria stops by once in a while to check in. She brought me a lemon pie last week, tasted like summer. I asked her why she helped me all those weeks ago, when she could have looked the other way. She smiled and said, "Because no one deserves to be buried before they're gone." She's right. The house is quiet now, but not in that dead, suffocating way it used to be. It's gentle, honest. I play music sometimes, Marjorie's old records. I even found the notebook where she wrote down all our anniversary dinners. I keep it near the kitchen now, like a recipe for what real love looked like. The neighbors say I look lighter. Maybe I do. I still walk with a limp. The arthritis hasn't gone away. My hands still ache when the rain comes in. But my spine is straighter, my voice steadier, because this house remembers me again. And the man who tried to erase me, he left behind nothing but silence, and a tree that will outlive us both. Some stories don't get passed down in photo albums. They don't hang on walls or sit in frames on mantels. They live in places deeper than that, in roots, in silence, in the space between a man's name and the echo it leaves behind. I wrote a letter last night, took my time, sat with the porch light on, the air thick with the smell of earth and rain. I folded the paper twice, sealed it, and slipped it into the small, time-locked box I'd bought months ago. The same kind that opens on a date you set. No sooner, no later. 18 years. That's when he'll read it. My grandson. The boy who never knew what nearly happened. Who giggled on my lap last Christmas, his cheeks sticky with peppermint, unaware that his father was plotting my exit just beyond the kitchen door. In the letter, I didn't write about hate. I wrote about strength. I told him about the time I worked 3 jobs to save for Greg's braces, about how I built the front porch with my own hands, how love isn't always loud, but it should always be real. I told him about legacy, not the kind you inherit, but the kind you defend. I wrote, "If someone ever tells you an old man is useless, remember this story. If they tell you silence means surrender, remember the oak. If they try to bury you, plant something instead. Let it grow." I buried the box just beside the tree, under a flat stone carved with one word, truth. No one will notice it now, but one day that boy will be grown. Maybe he'll be angry or confused or lost. Maybe someone will try to tell him the version of the story Greg left behind, and then he'll open the box. And my voice will meet him, steady and unashamed. This wasn't a story about a man who lost his family. It was about a man who remembered who he was, just in time. Greg thought he could bury me, but all he did was give me ground to grow in. And that tree, it's still reaching. So am I. If you've made it this far, thank you. Maybe you're someone like me. Maybe you've sat in a quiet house, waiting for a voice that never comes back. Maybe your hands ache in the morning, and no one asks how you slept. Maybe you felt like furniture. Useful once, but now just there. If so, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me sooner. You're still here, and that means something, not because of what you used to be, not because of what you own, but because you've carried love and loss and memory longer than most people can imagine. That's not weakness, that's weight. And the thing about weight is, it makes roots deeper. My story isn't special. Men like me are everywhere, silent in grocery store aisles, alone on park benches, watching family photos fade in hallways we used to build. But maybe if even one person hears this and thinks twice before calling their father old man, Maybe if one child decides to ask their grandfather about the war or the factory or the recipe no one wrote down, then maybe I wasn't buried. Maybe I was planted. And maybe the next time you see an oak tree standing proud in someone's backyard, you'll stop, not just to admire it, but to listen, because some trees carry stories, and some stories were never meant to be forgotten.